All right, so I'm currently on the phone with Mark. He's another musician that reached out about the interview series. So I'm going to go ahead and give him the chance to introduce himself.
Hello. First, thank you for having us on with this because it's really important what we're trying to do. My name is Mark Durstewitz. My middle name is Andrew, and the only reason I say that is because my initials are MAD, and I have always loved them. Yeah, it's been a lot. It was a lot of fun. My mother came to me after I was confirmed. It's a Lutheran thing that happened to see. It's kind of like the Catholic. Thanks. And she said, I didn't realize that your initials were MAD until after you were baptized. I'm so sorry. I said, I love my initials. I love them. We have a progressive rock band called Madmen and Dreamers. And Madmen and Dreamers, the title came from a song in our first project, The Children of Children, which we managed to get to a limited off-Broadway run, which was a fascinating experience. What we do is we write stories that mean something, and we bundle them up into what could be technically referred to as a rock opera, and we perform them to try and get people think.
Awesome, very cool. That's a unique approach. So we'll get to that, but before we get there, why don't you give me some detail and some background about how you first got into music? You know, what age were you? What about it touched you and made you want to pursue a life in it?
Well, that's interesting, and it goes back a ways. I have always been fascinated with music. My brother was as well. And it's interesting because nobody else in the family was particularly musical except my brother and I. And we couldn't figure out where the gene came from until my son found the rest of the family in Europe. We have my last name is a very, very old German name. It's attached to a Bronze Age site. And nobody's sure why. But all of the artists and engineers and musicians and everything, they're all still in Europe. So we figured, now we know where it came from. Because we were kind of an anachronism. But I was a little kid, and my brother was blessed with the ability to play anything that he could pick up. It was really, really amazing watching him do this. I was fascinated by the piano. And I was the little kid who, after church, used to run back into the room where everybody would congregate and bang on the piano until somebody slammed my fingers in the key guard. So the sound of a piano is always very interesting to me. And my brother, at one point, before he went away to school for a while, he taught me a song, and this is going to date me. It was by Donovan, if you know who that was or still is. My understanding is he's still alive. And the song was Atlantis. And it's a very, very simple piano thing, but it was also a song that I really, really liked. And it took them all of about 15 minutes to teach me the song. And so, that went, and I messed with that for a while. And, my brother and I would work together a few times on various things, which was always an interesting exercise. Because when you're brothers and you're both musicians, it can either be really good or it can be a disaster. So it kind of wandered between the two of them. But later years we would work on stuff together, and that sometimes was fascinating. But it's always been a big thing for my brother and I. We have always been musicians. It was our way of, I guess, making sense of the world. The Beatles broke when I was a very, very small boy. And that was fascinating watching that. I remember their first performance on Ed Sullivan. I'm really dating myself here. And I've been playing for more than 50 years, when you get right down to it. But we were fascinated by that. And then the Stones came out and all of that, and of course there was a great big upheaval with the British invasion. But I listened to a lot of their stuff when I was a kid. My brother listened to it over and over and over and over and over again, which really put a dent in it with me. But I was interested in a lot of Rod Stewart's early stuff, like with the Small Faces and whatnot. And there was some very good music that they made at that point. But as I got older, a little bit older, I started getting into early Elton John stuff because. And I'll say this with all sincerity, the man is the most intimidating piano player on the planet. You listen to what he's playing while he's singing. If you ever listen, live, playing it, it's truly a remarkable performance all the time. And it was a real thing with me. I literally would go to the library and get the fake book and I would bring the fake book home, and I'd move my record player downstairs. It wasn't a stereo; it was a simple record player, and I'd move it downstairs where the piano was, and I would look at the the fake book at the chords, and I would listen to what he was playing on the piano track, and I would try and figure out how to do that. And that was the start of my education.
Okay.
It was a fascinating process. And some of the things I learned easier than others, and some of the things I didn't learn until much later. So there was that, and then along at a certain point, my brother got me into Pink Floyd, and that was interesting. Dark Side of the Moon was first released to the public on a radio show called the King Biscuit Flower Hour, and I think it was on WNEW out of New York, because we lived in New Jersey. And he said to me, I've heard about this album. You got to listen to this.
Mm-hmm.
So we sat in his room, and it started with the clocks ticking, and yes, I'm mad. Of course I'm mad, but you have to explain why you're mad, even if you're not mad, and all this stuff. And I looked at my brother and I went, "Who are these guys?" And that really opened up a whole new horizon, for me, listening to their stuff, and I got really into it. It just, some of the most fascinating. It was the way they put sounds behind sounds. It was the way they layered things. It was all of the candy that was in the recordings, going on in the background, pieces of conversations and stuff like that. It was just fascinating. And I started, maybe it was because later I started writing, but short stories and novels, in addition to all of the poetry that would later become lyrics, when I was a kid, and reading novels, reading other people's work, and I read all kinds of stuff from Michener, Stephen King and Ray Bradbury, and all of these really amazing storytellers when I was a kid. I started to get ideas for writing longer form stuff, and then Tommy came out. And so Tommy fascinated me. I sat down and listened to the whole thing through. My brother and I both listened to the whole thing through. I was like, well, that's interesting, because there is a little bit of a story in there. So I started listening to stuff like that had all of the all of these stories in it. And then I got the idea for The Children of Children from a number of friends who were going through brutal divorces, and how they were being separated from their children as part of that process. And it was really painful for these guys. It was horrible to watch. So I started playing with this idea in my head that, it might be a good idea if the public actually knew about this from the father's point of view, without getting into things like support and whatnot, but just the emotional toll on a father, which everybody seemed to be ignoring. All of these friends were going through this, and not one of them was getting any support, in this area. So I really didn't know what to do with it, or how to go about it, until I surfed into the Peter Gabriel concert on Showtime one night. It was the Secret World Tour, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's very theatrical. Mm-hmm. At times. The song "Talk to Me," which was the hit off of the album Us, I think it was. The Paula Cole, who's singing backup for the performance, is on one end of the stage, and Peter Gabriel is on the other end of the stage in a phone box. Or at least I think that's what they call them in Britain. Other people would look at it and say, "Oh, that's the TARDIS," if they followed Doctor Who. But he was in there trying to talk to her through this song, and he was pulling the phone out of the box with him, and trying to walk across the stage with it, and he's pulling at it, he's lean way over there, and he never quite gets to her, before the song is over. So he never quite gets to tell her the things that he's trying to tell her in the song. And I remember watching that and going, wow, that's really cool. I wonder if that's the way we should do this. So, and the rest of the concert had a lot of really theatrical stuff in it like that. And that's what gave me the initial idea for how to put it together. And, when Chris and I, wrote it and got all the way through it and everything, we were wondering how to stage it when we recorded the album for it. We were wondering how to stage it. And so she called an old friend of hers, who was the director up in New York. His name was Ovi Vargas. And he came in, and Ovi helped us shape these initial performances of it. We toured that all through the New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, area up there before landing this limited run at the Bleecker Street Theater. And, that was a really, really interesting educational thing for us because we were learning not just how to perform a rock show, but it was a rock show in front of which there were a lot of actors working. And this one thing that I forgot, I backtrack a little bit. The Wall was also a really, really fascinating thing for me when it came out, because I had seen a lot of Broadway with my parents. So all of the seeds were in there. Godspell was the first thing I saw that had the band actually on the stage with the actors. And I remember, watching it, and this was really, really early. It was before it really took off. It was like the first run of it in this little tiny theater in Manhattan, which I believe is no longer there. But I remember watching that and being absolutely captivated by the fact that you could watch the actors and you could watch the band, and you could watch the actors and you could watch the band.
Sure.
And that's really so it was all simmering in the back there for a long time, before it started to happen. And, we wrote The Children of Children basically just as a great big concept album. It's a double CD. It's 128 minutes on the CD. But when you go to putting it on the stage, you have to change things. Have to, because they don't. Otherwise, they don't really translate. So we started learning that, and Ovi was a huge help with that. There was one song called "I Will Not Fight," which we literally had to cut in half, but one half in the first act and half in the second act, in order to make the story work better. And we cut a bunch of stuff out of it. By the time we got it to Bleecker Street, it was down to about an hour and 45 minutes, from the 128 minutes. And we played it straight through, no intermission, or anything. We just, right, and had this huge, uplifting ending in it, and it worked very well, and it was received very well. We were trying to get it reviewed, but unfortunately, the policy in Manhattan is they don't review limited runs, so we couldn't get it reviewed. And we ran it, as long as we could sustain it, and then we just couldn't sustain it anymore. So we had to close. Everything closes, but we learned a lot. So it was a good experience for us. And as a friend of mine, later said, he goes, I know the genesis of this, and I guess you just had to get this out of your system. And I said, yeah, I really did. But when we got done with The Children of Children, we all sat in the studio that we had up north, and it was in this really, really idyllic setting called Paterson, New Jersey. And there was razor wire on the roof of the building, and the windows had bars on them. Because it was not a good neighborhood. We kept the shotgun in the studio, I swear to God.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that did. There was a break in there one night while I was there, and that was really tense. I managed to talk the guy into leaving, but it was really, really tense. Like 5 minutes.
Sure, I bet.
But yeah, I almost shit myself. But so we all sat down and said, okay, the Children of Children is in the can. What do we work on next? And everybody went, climate. And I was like, well, yeah. And then it became, how do you tell a story about climate change?
Mm-hmm.
In order to produce drama amongst your characters, you have to treat your characters badly. Okay. And as a friend of ours who's a writer in New York City said, writers are mean to their characters.
Yeah.
So we had to figure out the mean way to do this. Well, we couldn't have them deprived of food, because that would take 40 days or something like that for them to die. So this really, when you're dealing with a compressed amount of time, you can't, have people starve to death, because it just takes too long, right? And we couldn't make the atmosphere unbreathable, because that would last about 3 minutes, before someone actually died. But we all looked at each other and went, water,
Mm-hmm.
So okay, we've got water. So I did a bunch of research, into how long you can live without water and all this kind of stuff. And one night we found ourselves at a World Hunger Year dinner. We were invited to it, Chris and I. And so we're sitting there, and I'm sitting between their international coordinator, a guy named Peter Mann, who's a really, really cool British guy with really, really long gray hair. And Aldous Huxley's granddaughter on the other side.
Oh, okay.
It was a blast. I mean, she and I had the most hilarious conversation because she's telling me all this crazy stuff about her grandfather. It was really,
Okay.
really, and then at one point, because Chris was sitting on the other side of Peter Mann, all of a sudden I feel this tug on my shoulder, and I turn around and I look, and he goes, "Mark, can you tell me when this story takes place?" And I said, "You mean as far as inside the story?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, I guess in about 50 years." He goes, "Oh, no, no. Christine's been telling me about this. We need to talk." So Mario's one of the other writers. Mario and I went in there one night, went into his offices one night after work, and we sat down with him and a hydrological engineer. And we proceeded to have this 2.5 hour conversation, about water. And it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. And they said that, the things that you are, the themes and stuff in the story are not fiction. This is happening all over the world. And we're like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And so they gave me about 1.5 inches of trade publications. Okay. And these weren't just like articles, that you'd find, in whatever website, on the net. These were trade publications. And I went home, sat on the sofa with a highlighter, and started to go through them. And when Chris got up the next morning, I was still there.
Oh, jeez.
And she looks at me, she goes, "You've been up all night?" And I went, "Yeah, I like couldn't put this down." And she goes, "How bad is it?" I went, "You don't want to know." And I closed it all up and I locked it in the file cabinet because I did not want anybody to read it but me. I can take it,
Mm-hmm.
And so we started to write this story. And it was difficult to write because you have to take something as big and as all-encompassing as climate change and boil it down into a small group of characters that everyone can relate to. If you don't have that relation, you lose them. Okay? And so it took a while and a lot of readings. In Manhattan, we had, a libretto, which is basically a text document with all the lyrics in it. And what you do at a reading is you go in, with a bunch of actors, and you say, okay, you're this one, you're this one, you're this one, you're that one, and okay, I'm going to sit down over here and you just read this back to me. It sounds silly, but man, do you hear the bad choices come out of this? It's like you're sitting there and you go, yeah, that hurts. Just cross it out, And so we went through a bunch of those, and then we went through a reading with music industry people in the room. And that was interesting. That was really, really interesting. There was a guy in there named Harvey Rosen. And Harvey, in the music industry and in the legal aspect of it, is a really, really big deal. And he's a really, really nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
So he and our attorney, that we had up there showed up, and a bunch of other people, showed up. But Harvey and Paul and I ended up talking, over in this corner. And Harvey said, "I really got to give it to you." He said, "Music is a craft, and there's not a lot of that going on these days." He said, "It's all." As he put it, it's all shit. And he made a move that you would see on certain genres in, like on MTV or something like that. And he makes this move and he goes, "And that ain't a dance move." And I instantly loved him, because he was so direct, and he was so no bullshit. And he was a really, really cool guy. We talked on the phone a couple of times. And unfortunately he passed away at one point, and I didn't find out about it until his wife was posting on his Facebook, and so that, really, really bummed me out. But, you have to keep going. And so we set up a sing through, for some industry, in the city. And that was, they sang to recorded tracks that we had put together. And, that was interesting. And it was fairly well attended. There were some interesting people there. And we talked a little bit afterwards, and and people were kind of like, this is a really interesting idea, but we really don't know, how to do this. And I went, "That's my problem, not your problem." I know how to do this, And so we went through all of that, and we had some material that we had recorded before of this, and we took the 12 or so strongest songs out of there. and put them in places in the story that where they would be the most effective. And then once I had the themes, all squared away during the writing process, I could say, okay, well, I'm starting here and I have to end up there, so go. I sat down at the piano, and in 8 months I wrote 38 songs, and it was piano, strings, horns, bass, drums, choir voices, harmonies. Chris generally would write the melodies, and then the harmonies for these things, and and boom, all of a sudden we had this score attached to it, and while we were working on that, the job market in and around New York City collapsed for what I do as my day job, because 98% of the music industry has day jobs. I hate to break it, but that's the way it works now. And so I had a long conversation with a certain company, which I won't name because I don't want to get anyone into trouble. And at the end of that conversation, when I found out that they were stringing me along while they negotiated with a former employee, I threw my phone across the room and and said to Chris, "We're moving to North Carolina, which is where the kids are." And they had been harassing us for, I want to say, 8 years or so to move down there. And we had a couple of grandkids, and now we've got three. And they brought a whole different facet to this. Because now it's not just about what's going to happen in a general way in the world. I'm looking at my children and I'm looking at their children, and I don't know if you're going to edit this or not. And I'm going, what the fuck, and it really, really started, to really, really weigh on me. And it was idling in the back of my head. And then one day, a guy in church said to me, I was talking to your son, and because he's very well known in and around here because he runs a craft brewery and is a very, very successful craft brewer. So he comes, he goes, "What's this? You've got a rock opera about climate change?" And I went, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, we need to talk." So he sits down, and I wasn't really sure what we were going to do with this. After we moved, I was thinking about it. We were wondering, well, what can we do? And this guy just grabbed this thing and basically harassed me into doing it. And he had a lot of very good arguments, about it. And I sat and I listened to him very patiently for a while, and he said, "Will you do it?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll try it. We can only take it so far under our own steam, though. At a certain point, we're going to have to get investment, on it." And he just, "Well, you'll start the process." And I said, "Yeah, I'll start the process." And there were a couple of other people that harassed us like this, which is really funny. One of them is a friend of mine that's way up in the UN, up there. And his name is Joseph, and he was telling me, he said, I see this all the time. He said, you really have to do something about this. He said, this show could change a lot, and okay, so he was saying it, and then Chris's acting coach was saying it, and we both looked at each other and went, okay, we have to do something about this. So it was all these things. It was like, whether you want to call it God or the universe, or somebody throwing stones across the street at you, or something, or something like that. We decided to do it, and we did some previews down here. We did about 45 minutes of the show against tracks with actors that we hired, and the actors were really kind of unbelievable because they were in Opera Carolina, which is a big thing, in Charlotte, and the previews were extremely well received. And we were kind of like, wow, that's really something. I mean, we had 2 sets of previews 7 months apart. We did not do anything different advertising between those 2 groups of performances, and we doubled the attendance. And I talked to the lady that does the marketing, and she goes, "That's exactly what you want." And I went, "Okay, so here we go. Let me try and find musicians that can play this." Because it's not easy. It's not easy stuff. But while all of this was going on, I kept coming back to, we can't just play the show and leave. The show has to accomplish something. Otherwise, it's just vanity, you know, at a certain point. So we did a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, a lot of, poking around on the web and talking to people that in the activist communities up north, because we were involved with them. And what we came up with is, okay, well, let's raise money for environmental groups from ticket sales. And so we've been doing that with the last two groups of shows. And we're trying to get more people moving, because all of the scientists that I have access to, and they're very easy to talk to. Catherine Hayhoe is on Twitter, and we talk on Twitter, and Michael Mann and I are on Facebook. And if you have to approach scientists, from the point of view that you're a layman and they're not, And even though I have technical background, and scientific training, from college, and I work in scientific and technical field as a writer, I still am not an atmospheric physicist. So I go, okay, now I think this might happen, but is that true? And if I'm off base, they go, no, that's completely, outrageous. It's not, that won't happen. It's like, okay, good. But, so we needed to accomplish something. So basically what we're trying to do is not only raise money for environmental groups, but at the same time, we want to leave behind us a group of people working on a local issue.
Sure.
And hopefully down the road, as we play more and more places and we go farther and farther out from where we are right here, we can leave these little cells behind us, and then possibly at some point in the future get them to coordinate. And because that's really where we are. If you've been following the problem, we are in a heap of trouble, and a lot of people don't understand how much trouble that we're in. It is really serious. Right. And I spend a certain amount of time up walking the house at night, because I can't sleep, with this.
Well, so it sounds like you have a collectives gather where you're getting tickets and everything. Where can people find what you're doing and the movement that you're trying to make? You mentioned you have Facebook, but where else can people first of all check out Children of Children, but then also look into your current project?
Yeah, we perform Water Incorporated through a nonprofit called Mad Elf Arts and Entertainment, and that website is Mad Elf, MADELF. That's M as in Mary, A as in Andrew, D as in Delta, Edward, Lima, Foxtrot. And the reason we use that is because my initials are Mad, and my wife has been the elf ever since our first date.
Before we kind of move to close the interview, is there anything else that you want to throw out there about the project that you're working on, or anything in general?
Well, yeah, this all the climate change stuff is about Water Incorporated. And that website is madelf.org. That'll give you a rundown of the why of it. There we have Madmen and Dreamers has a SoundCloud. And a lot of stuff on the SoundCloud, some from both shows. On the Madmen and Dreamers Facebook page, which Madmen and Dreamers is the band name, on their Facebook page there is also video of some of the shows. There's live video shot of the Children of Children. It's about 45 minutes of the show. And there are other videos that have static images in them, and they're from Water Incorporated. Usually you can tell by the flaming logo. When you see that flaming logo with a water drop inside of it and two people fighting over a shotgun in the water drop, you've reached the right place.
So I probably can anticipate where this is going, but what would be a life lesson that you would want to put out there to just kind of, spread out into the world?
Well, my friend Joseph from up north, when we landed the limited run at the Bleecker Street Theater, he looked over his glasses at me and he said, Winston Churchill once said, never, ever, ever give up.